Welcome to Marine Gurukul video series. You may use the details on the screen to connect with us for our online tutorial services.
Hi, this is Captain Sunil Bhaba from Marine Gurukul. In this video, we are going to explore the LRIT, Long Range Identification and Tracking System. The identification and tracking of ships has been a very important aspect of shipping from time immemorial. In the olden days, when we did not have proper means of communication between ship and shore, it was very difficult to track the progress of a ship during its voyage. The ships used to depart from their departure port, and the next news of their well-being came when the ships arrived at their destination. Today, that's not the case. We have high-tech systems and equipment available to us on a modern-day bridge, which can track the progress of a ship almost on a minute-to-minute basis. LRIT is one such system which is available to us on a modern-day bridge. We have another system also available to us, and that is the AIS, Automatic Identification System, which helps in identification as well as tracking of ships. The AIS came in as a mandatory requirement under the ISPS code. It was made mandatory in December 2004. The LRIT, on the other hand, is a recent addition to the bridge. The LRIT mandatory carriage came into force on 1st January 2008. It was brought in by a SOLAS amendment. Now, looking at the sequence of events, an obvious question which comes in our mind is that what was the need of bringing in the LRIT when we already had a AIS system working on board? The LRIT was required because of two major and serious limitations of the AIS system. Number one, AIS was based on VHF communication. It had limited range. The position could be transmitted or the ships could be tracked only within the VHF range. LRIT, on the other hand, is based on satellite communication and has global reach. The ships can be tracked on a global scale. The second major and serious limitation of AIS was that the AIS is a broadcast system, which means that any station having a AIS receiver within the VHF range can obtain the AIS information of any particular ship. Now, this information had the potential to go into wrong hands, and it was seen during piracy time that this information was used by pirates to attack the ships itself. So this was a very major and serious concern about the AIS system, which necessitated the LRIT. So LRIT covers up both these limitations of the AIS system. So with this understanding clear in our mind, let us now go into the details of the LRIT system. The LRIT system, Long Range Identification and Tracking System, provides for global identification and tracking of ships. This is used to enhance the security as well as the safety of shipping and also to protect the marine environment. The LRIT utilizes the satellite communication system for its data transmissions. Vessels transmit and report their identity as well as position with the date and time every 6 hours in the default mode, that is 4 times per day, to authorized recipients using this system. This LRIT data can be accessed by flag states for vessels which are flying their flags. This can be accessed by coastal states for vessels which are within 1,000 nautical miles of their coastline, and also by port states for vessels which are seeking entry to a particular port, usually up to a period of 96 hours prior to the expected time of arrival. Thus, In simple terms, LRIT is a collection and distribution system for basic information of ships. The next aspect of the LRIT system is the data which is transmitted. Now the data which is transmitted is the identity of the ship. The identifier is used by the LRIT equipment on board, and this is usually the IMO number of the ship. The system also has the name as well as the call sign as well as the MMSI number of the ships in its database. The second data item which is transmitted is the position of the vessel. The position is picked up from the GNSS system, that is Global Navigation Satellite System, which is most frequently the GPS, Global Positioning System on board. The latitude and longitude of the ship is picked up based on the WGS84 datum and is transmitted. The third data item which is picked up again from the GNSS or GPS of the ship is the time and date data. The date and time at which that particular position was applicable or the date and time associated with the position. The times which are transmitted on the LRIT system are all UTC times or GMT times. Now the next important aspect which comes in the LRIT system is, can the countries or member states receive information about any ship in the world? Or in other words, who are the authorized recipients of the LRIT data, or who are the LRIT data users? Now the access to LRIT information is provided to limited number of parties. These are, number one, the flag state of the vessel. Flag state has full access to the data of all the ships which are flying its flag. The second party which is authorized to receive the LRIT data is the coastal state. Coastal states can poll and track ships up to 1,000 nautical miles from their coastline, but not if the vessel is in the territorial waters of another states. And the third party to which the data is transmitted, or the party which is a authorized LRIT data user, is the port state. A port state can also poll and track ships at any distance following a notice of port call. This is usually done up to 96 hours before the ETA of the ship. Again, this may not be possible if the vessel is in territorial waters of another state. Now, along with the flag state, coastal state and the port state, the LRIT data is also accessible to search and rescue services of any particular area or country. Authorized search and rescue services may request and receive the LRIT data only for vessels within their respective search and rescue area. This information to the search and rescue services is provided free of cost, and the costs which are involved in communication and data transfers are usually borne by the flag of the vessel from which the data was requested. So to put it broadly, the authorized data users or the LRIT data users are the member states in three different scenarios. Number one, flag state for the ships flying their flag. Number two, coastal states for the ships within 1,000 nautical miles of the coastline of any particular state. And in the third scenario, port state, ships calling into any port that particular state can request the LRIT data as well as the search and rescue services. Now, other than the member state and the search and rescue services, access to LRIT information may be provided to some more parties by the flag state. These are, number one, the ship owner. The ship owner may access the data to its own ships, the ships which are owned by that particular ship owner. The data may be shared with the surveyors who are involved in the conformance test of the LRIT equipment. A conformance test is done when a LRIT equipment is fitted on board. Now this equipment is operated and a confirmation is received from the data center that the equipment is working well. This is known as a conformance test. So during the period of the conformance test, this LRIT data is provided to the surveyors who are conducting these kinds of tests. The data may be further provided to agents and charterer. The access may be granted by the ship owner, and the data is provided to piracy prevention task forces for anti-piracy operations. Now the LRIT system involves what we call as a international data exchange. This international data exchange stores the LRIT data of all the ships in the world. This data is then picked up and can be distributed to all the authorized recipients or the authorized users whenever they request this data. Next, we move on to the regulatory framework of the LRIT system. On what type of ships is it mandatory to carry the LRIT system? Now, the regulation of carriage, mandatory carriage of LRIT applies to ships which are engaged on international voyages. Which type of ships? It is applicable to all the passenger ships, including high-speed crafts. The mandatory carriage is applicable to cargo ships, including any high-speed crafts of 300 gross tons and upwards. And this regulation is also applicable to mobile offshore drilling units. Chapter 5 of SOLAS, Safety of Navigation, Regulation 19 on LRIT requires that vessels automatically transmit their identity, position, and the date and time of that particular position at 6 hourly intervals automatically and without any human intervention. Now, are there any type of ships which are exempted to carry the LRIT equipment? Yes. Ships which are operating exclusively in Sea Area A1, GMDSS Sea Area A1, are exempted from the requirement to transmit the LRIT information. Now this exemption is given because these ships are already required to be fitted with the automatic identification system. The AIS provides for identification and tracking within the VHF range requirement of Sea Area A1. So the requirement of identification and tracking is fulfilled by the AIS system. Thus, the LRIT is not mandatorily required on these type of ships. Also, the shipborne LRIT equipment should transmit the LRIT information using a communication system which provides coverage in all areas wherever the ship operates. Now we have the Inmarsat system, which provides excellent coverage from 70 degrees north to 70 degrees south range. And if a ship is going in latitudes higher than 70 degrees north or south, it could use the COSPAS SARSAT system, which is effective in the polar regions also. Next, going into the modes of operation of the LRIT equipment. Now there are two different modes or two different ways in which the information can be requested and transmitted using the LRIT equipment. The first mode is known as the automatic position report mode, in short the APR mode. In the APR mode, the LRIT equipment transmits the required data, which is the identity of the ship, the position of the ship, as well as the date and time of the position at every 6-hour interval. This is done automatically, and this does not require any human intervention or any involvement from the duty officer side. The second mode on which the equipment can transfer the information is known as the polling mode or the polled mode. Now this polled mode involves a request and response process. The polling request is initiated by the LRIT data center, and this request is received by the onboard equipment, the LRIT equipment. Once this request is received, the polling request is received, the LRIT equipment responds to the poll request and it transmits the on-demand position report immediately. Information regarding the identity, position, and the date and time is sent immediately back to the data center. The data center can also send a remote polling command to modify the automatic positioning report to any frequency between once every 15 minutes to once every 6 hours. So this is the capability of the system. As a default, the system transmits its data every 6 hours, but if the data center requires, it can send a command, remote polling command, through the communication system to the equipment on board the ship, and the equipment can transmit as required by the data center on any frequency between every 15 minutes to every 6 hours. No human involvement or setting needs to be done by the OW on board the vessel. This can be done remotely from the data center and the equipment will respond to this command. Now we move on to the different components of the LRIT system and the requirements related to those components. The first and the most important component is the shipborne LRIT transmitting equipment. The shipborne equipment sends the automatic position reports, receives any polling requests from the data center, and updates the frequency if required. This shipborne LRIT equipment should be capable of being remotely configured to an automatically transmitted LRIT information at intervals ranging from a minimum of 15 minutes period to a 6-hour period to the LRIT data center, as we just discussed in the previous slide. The equipment should be set to automatically transmit the ship's LRIT information at 6-hourly intervals to the required data center, which is identified by the administration. Unless the LRIT data user requests the provision of LRIT information, specifies a more frequent transmission interval. The shipborne LRIT equipment should also be capable of transmitting the LRIT information whenever it receives a remote polling command from the data center. So at any point of time, the data center can send a remote polling command to the equipment and the equipment will immediately respond with a position report. The equipment should be connected directly to the GNSS equipment or the GPS equipment on board. It will pick up all this information from the GPS, that is the position as well as the date and time. Or it is also possible that the LRIT equipment may have an internal positioning capability or an internal GPS independent of the ship's GPS. It should be supplied with power from the main and emergency source, and the equipment should be tested for electromagnetic compatibility. These are basically the performance standards of the LRIT equipment. The next important component of the LRIT system is the communication service provider. The communication service provider, in short known as the CSP, provides the communication infrastructure and its services to ensure that we have an end-to-end secure transfer of the LRIT information between the ship and the application service provider. The next component is the application service provider, in short known as ASP. The application service provider receives the data from the ship. It converts that data in a required default data format and it sends this particular data to the LRIT data center. Now, once the data is received by the LRIT data center, it stores and processes this data, and it also determines which reports are to be sent to other coastal states or port states via the international data exchange. Now this transfer or supply of information is based on a set of guidelines. These guidelines are provided by the data distribution plan. The data distribution plan specifies which all countries or which all member states are authorized to receive the LRIT data. Now there may be different types of LRIT data centers being used by different countries or different member states. These are: number one, the national data center. Now the countries which are having their own data center, they have established data centers of their own without the involvement of any second or third party. These data centers are known as national data center. For example, India operates its own data center and it is known as the National Data Center. Now another type of arrangement which is possible is a regional or a cooperative data center. Now a regional or cooperative data center can be made by two or more member states. They can join hands with each other and they can establish a single data center which services or which takes care of the data transmission of all these member states and their flagged vessels. A group of countries can join hands in a particular region. They can cooperate with each other and establish a single data center, and this data center takes care of the LRIT data reception and transmission of all the ships of these member states. Now a third type of data center which is available is the international data center. Any country or any member state which is not having a national data center and is also not part of any regional or cooperative data center can use the international data center to receive and transmit its data. Now many of the member states may be having vessels monitoring system or a VTS station under them. Now these vessels monitoring systems, VMS or VTS stations, have the capability to access and transmit the data. So a vessels monitoring system may also provide the tracking and data center services for a country. The next important component which we have is the LRIT data distribution plan. The data distribution plan basically controls the transmission and flow of the data to the authorized parties. This data distribution plan, in short known as DDP, verifies that the member state which is requesting the information is authorized as per the LRIT principles to receive the data or not. The entire communication of the data in the LRIT system works exactly as specified in the data distribution plan. Then we have the International LRIT Data Exchange. As we discussed earlier, it stores the global LRIT data and it routes the data to the authorized receiving parties. Let us now try to understand the complete LRIT system architecture as well as the flow of information. We can easily understand it from this particular diagram. The diagram looks very complicated and overwhelming in the beginning, but it will be very easy to understand once you get to know the basic concept behind this. So let's try to understand and simplify this part by part. So first of all, you can see in the diagram that they have divided the contracting governments in three different parts. You have the contracting governments A, then you have the contracting governments B, C and D, Bravo Charlie Delta, and then the contracting governments Eco Foxtrot Golf, E, F, G. Now why these contracting states or member states are divided into three different parts? That is because, as we just now discussed, some of the countries may be having national data centers of their own. Say for example India, we have our own national data center. So the ships which are flying the flag of these kind of countries or states, they will be transmitting and sending their data to their national data center. All the ships which are flying the Indian flag, they send their data to the Indian National Data Center. Now, some of the countries may not be having their independent data center. They may have joined hands with each other. In a particular region, they may have cooperated with each other and established a single data center to cater to all the member states. This kind of data center is known as a regional or cooperative data center. So you can see in the diagram, these countries are the ones which are having a regional or cooperative data center. So the second set of ships are the ones which are flying the flags of the countries having a regional or cooperative data center. Now all these ships send their data to this particular data center, regional or cooperative data center. Now there could be a third set of countries. You see these set of countries, EFG, Eco Foxtrot Golf. They may not be having their own national data center and they may not be part of any regional or cooperative data center. Now the vessels which are flying the flag of these countries, they can send their LRIT data to the international data center. So you can see here we have the international data center here. So once the data is received by any of these data centers, national, regional or cooperative or international, this data is further transmitted or sent to the international LRIT data exchange. You can see the entire data reaching up to the international LRIT data exchange. This international LRIT data exchange stores the complete global data for the LRIT system. Another thing which you notice here is there is a green line representing the communication happening between the equipment present on the ships and the data center, and this signifies the standard for data format, set of possible commands, security and user interface may vary from place to place. There can be slight variations in the type of the messages which the equipment sends to the data center. Now once the data center receives the information, it converts this information into a default format, and when the information goes from the data center to the exchange, you can see these blue color arrows representing the flow of information from the data center to the exchange, and you can see this blue color line specifying there is now one standard for data format, set of commands, security and quality standards, etc. So any differences which may be present when the data is transmitted from the ship's equipment are ironed out at the data center level, and when this is transmitted to the international LRIT data exchange, this refers to one fixed standard set for the format of the data. The international LRIT data exchange has the inflow of data from the data center, and whenever required, it transmits that data or sends the data back to the data center whenever they request it. All this is done by the international data exchange following the international routing rules under the LRIT system. These routing rules are given under the LRIT data distribution plan. You can follow the laser pointer. You can see that all these data centers, whether it is a national data center or a regional or cooperative data center, or it is the international data center, they all work under the authority of the LRIT data distribution plan. So this sums up the entire communication. Data is transmitted from the ships to the data center, from the data centers to the international data exchange. The international data exchange stores the entire data and it gives the data which is required by the member state as authorized by the LRIT system. Next, we move on to the role of the administration in the implementation and running of the LRIT system. Now, first of all, each administration or country or member state should select a particular LRIT data center. It could have its own LRIT data center, like India we have our national data center, or it could be part of a regional or cooperative data center, or it could send its reports through the international data center. Once the data center has been selected, the administration should provide the data center a comprehensive list of all the ships which are entitled to fly its flag, all the ships which are required to transmit the LRIT information to that particular LRIT data center. Now these lists need to be updated. Almost changes may be happening almost on a daily basis. The changes could be, there could be ships which are getting out of service, which are getting scrapped. There could be new ships which are getting registered under a particular flag. And there could be existing ships which are changing their flag, either leaving a particular country or joining a particular country. So these lists should be updated without any undue delay, so that at any point of time the data center has a updated list of the stations or the ships which are required to send their LRIT data to that particular data center. Now you can see that the basic intention behind this administration's role is that they want to make the system totally automatic and not dependent upon any human intervention at all. The ship staff or from the ship side, there is no requirement of doing anything. The onus of getting the data has gone to the data center. When the data center has these lists, updated lists available with it, the data center can immediately check and it can come to know if it is not receiving the data for a particular ship. It can then inform the administration, and which can then tell the ship owner or the ship to check why their equipment is not transmitting the data. Ships should only transmit the LRIT information to that particular data center which is selected by their administration. Let us now recap the working of the LRIT system as we have seen in the LRIT system architecture. LRIT data is automatically transmitted every 6 hours from the vessel to the communication service provider. The communication service provider passes on this data to the application service provider, and the application service provider changes its format, brings it to a default set format, and passes on to the LRIT data center. The data center forwards this information to all the applicable parties. It may be through the international data exchange, and all this exchange of information is done as guided or as specified in the data distribution plan. Information which is transmitted by the ships is available to the vessel's flag state at all times. For another countries or another states to access this information, they will need to send a request to the international data exchange. The international data exchange is going to check whether they are the authorized users of this information, and if yes, the international data exchange is going to pass on that information to other countries. The international data exchange is linked with the data distribution plan, and the data distribution plan specifies the routing rules, and it is going to verify that the party or the state which has requested the information is authorized to access the information or not. The data distribution plan ensures that this data is passed on only to the authorized recipients of the data. The recipients could be flag state for all the ships which are flying their flag. It could be port state for all the ships which are going to call that port, and coastal state for all the ships which are within 1000 nautical miles of their coastline, and the search and rescue services. Once it is verified by the DDP that the information request is valid, the international data exchange then acts as a link, and it sends the data to the requesting station. Now, since we have two different identification systems available to us on board, that is the AIS, Automatic Identification System, and the LRIT, Long Range Identification and Tracking System, let us evaluate and compare both these systems to find out what all differences do they have. Now, the major difference between AIS and LRIT is the range of the system. AIS operates in the VHF band with line of sight communication, and AIS is able to provide only coverage in the local area or in the VHF range. Whereas LRIT, being a satellite based communication system, has a global reach or global coverage. Another very important difference between the two systems is that AIS is a broadcast system. AIS broadcasts a lot of data. We have the static data, we have the dynamic data, we also have the voice related data being transmitted by the AIS. And this information is transmitted by the AIS in a digital format using the SOTDMA system. And the information is refreshed or updated at a few seconds interval. Whereas on the other hand, the LRIT transmits and updates the data with a default frequency of every 6 hours. This frequency can be modified by remote polling command from the data center to the equipment on the ship. This can be modified to any interval between 15 minutes to 6 hours. AIS is a broadcast system and the data is available to all the ships, any VTS or any coast AIS station which is present within the VHF range. The information is provided to these stations free of cost. You see, this was one of the limitations of the AIS system which necessitated the bringing in of the LRIT. The LRIT data is only available to the authorized recipients, which are the flag state, the port state, and the coastal state in different conditions, and the search and rescue services. The information is passed only to the authorized recipients as per the data distribution plan, and this information is not free, it is chargeable, except the countries having the information for the ships which are flying their own flag and search and rescue services, for which the information is free of cost. Moving further, comparing AIS with LRIT, AIS provides the navigational information of a vessel as well as the data regarding the type of ship, her dimensions, draft, cargo, destination in 4 message forms, that is static, dynamic, voyage related, and safety related. Whereas LRIT provides us with only bare basic information, that is the vessel's identity, position, and the date and time when that position was applicable. In AIS, some of the data items need to be manually updated. For example, the navigational status. Whereas in LRIT, no user intervention or update is required. The system is totally independent without any involvement of the human intervention. AIS data is not stored at all anywhere. The LRIT data, on the other hand, is stored and is available on demand. The entire data is available in the International Data Exchange. The basic intention of the AIS is to improve the situational awareness of the OOW, which helps in collision avoidance, which help in his awareness regarding the surroundings of the ship, and it is of great use to nearby vessels and the VTS systems. LRIT, on the other hand, is a reporting system that assists the concerned parties like flag state, the coastal state, the port state, as well as the search and rescue services in identifying and tracking the ships. Now we have seen that the LRIT, Long Range Identification and Tracking System, is a very important and critical system which works independently, automatically, and without any human intervention, which helps a flag state track all its ships. Now, are there any circumstances or conditions in which it may be required to switch off the LRIT equipment? Or are there any special conditions or circumstances where a master is allowed to switch off the LRIT equipment? Yes, there are some conditions where the LRIT equipment can be switched off. Now, these are number one, where international agreements, rules, or standards provide for the protection of the navigational information. Like, say, for example, in case of the warships. The warships have a right of protecting their navigational data, and they can switch off the LRIT equipment. Also, it is possible in exceptional circumstances and for the shortest duration possible, where a master has determined that the operation of LRIT may compromise the safety or the security of the ship. It can be switched off. Or another practical scenario, operational scenario, where a ship is undergoing repairs in a dry dock, or a ship is in a port where it is laid up for a long period, the master may temporarily stop the transmission or may reduce the frequency of transmission to, let us say, once every 24 hours. Now, whenever such a action is taken, in all these cases, the master shall inform the administration without any undue delay and should also make an entry in the logbook setting out what were the reasons in which the LRIT was switched off and indicating the period during which the equipment remained off. This brings us to the end of this video. If the video helped you, please do like and share our content. This motivates us to generate content similar to this one, and it also helps these kind of videos reach out to more people. If you need any kind of assistance, please do write to us on marinegurukul@gmail.com. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I wish you all the best.